Okay, so it looks like many of you really enjoyed my last video about handlebar width. You had great feedback and some awesome comments that made me realize a few things. Handlebar width is very important, but it's only a tiny parameter of setting up your bike correctly. There is a lot of things that work together that are crucial for good fitting, good performance. I think this is gonna be an awesome video. Let's dive into it. Okay, before we look at the in-depth setup of your bike, there's a few obvious things that we should mention. First of all, if you're getting a new bike, you have to be honest with the type of riding you want to be doing. Are you gonna pedal that bike a lot? Are you gonna shuttle it? Are you doing many bike park days? Because if you pick up the wrong bike, regardless how well it's set up, you're not gonna have the best experience. Once you identify the category of bike you want to be riding, make sure you do a lot of research with the different bike brands. There's plenty of great bikes out there, but especially about the geometry. You want to pick up a bike that is a size that fits you best. There's a few things you can do, and we'll talk about it later in the video in case your bike feels a little bit small or a little bit big. But if you start with the right geometry, obviously things are much easier. Another things, wheel size. Do you want a full 29er? Do you want a mullet? Of course, best is to try, but if you can try, having a bike like this one, for example, with a flip chip that allows you to either ride it full 29er or mullet is a great option. Okay, I think we can jump straight into the setups, but we should go somewhere where it's dry because it's a little bit wet here. Okay, I definitely feel a little bit warmer right now. Before I tell you about every step I use to set up each new bike I have, and as you can see, I have many bikes, and yet I use the same process every time. I follow the same order. There's one thing that's really important that I do before I even touch any of the components. I'm simply gonna put air in my tires, and I'm gonna make sure that my suspension have the right spring rate. Why is this important? Because if you sit on your bike and you got 50% sag because you didn't choose the right spring, or you don't have the right air pressure, or you have a flat tire, well, your balance on the bike is not gonna be correct, and therefore you can't adjust properly your handlebars or your seat or anything like that. So first step, air in your tires and right spring rate. For your suspension, you can go off the owner's manual. It's usually a really good starting point. So my first step is to figure out my pedaling position. Seat post up, I want to know how high should be that seat. In a previous video, I mentioned the Le Monde formula, which in my opinion works really well, but there was a few comments about the fact that it's not a perfect formula since it doesn't take in consideration a few things, such as your crank length, the type of shoe you are using, and how you pedal. If you have clip pedals, how far forward is your cleat is going to affect how high your seat is going to be. But for me, it works really well. And what it is your inseam, so just above 80 centimeters for me, times 0.883, and you get a number. For me, that's 70.5 centimeters. And that's actually consistent with every bike I ride, including my road bike, even though I use different shoes. Now, if this formula doesn't work well for you, you can use the good old technique where you sit on your bike, seat post up, you put your heel on the pedal, and when your foot is at the bottom like this and your cranks are in line with the seat tube, you should have a slight bend behind the knee. If you have no bend, then that means your seat is too high and your hips are gonna be rocking. And if you have too much bend, then your seat is too low and your pedaling position is gonna be inefficient. Okay, let's talk about the seat. Well, if you picked up a bike that is the right size for you, the common sense will want you to start with the marks on the rail exactly in the middle of your seat post. But myself, I tend to order bikes that are slightly too big for me because I like the extra confidence I get at high speed. So in order to compensate that for when I pedal, I need to start with my seat slightly forward. If you look at the angle of the seat, I would say for most mountain bikers out there, you want your seat perfectly parallel to the ground. Now, if you ride downhill and you look at the downhill World Cup racer, they run their seat slightly up. That's because you actually use your seat a lot when you go down. Whereas cross-country racer who focus mostly on performance for pedaling uphill or on the flat, sometimes run their seat slightly down. But I think flat is a great start. Okay, now let's talk about seat height on a downhill position. Something that is worth mentioning, especially if you have a downhill bike because there is more travel, you always want to bottom out the bike to make sure that you've got enough space between the bottom of your seat and the tire, and you want at least an extra 5 or 10 millimeters of safety because your tire will deform, so will your frame on heavy compression. If your tire ends up touching your seat, that might stop you or slow you down and push your weight forward. That happened to me on the landing once, and I've seen people where it happened to them on compression on actually the takeoff leading to a jump, and that wasn't very pretty to see. Now I want to answer a question that I've seen online a lot where people wish they could run longer dropper posts. Well, you see, dropper posts for me are a little bit like handlebar width. The travel of your post should be proportional to your body. For example, I have 80 cm inseam. I should definitely not have as much travel as someone that's got 90 cm inseam, simply because my legs are shorter and therefore I don't squat as deep. This is a one-up component V3 post, 180 mm, and I believe that even if I could run a 190, 200 or 210 mm, I'll probably stick to a 180 mm because that gives me the correct position when I go downhill. Actually, there's a downhill bike behind me, and the seat position on it is slightly higher than it is on my trail bikes, and that's of course because it also got more travel, but it's mostly because I use the seat a lot when I corner, when I jump, when I'm trying to hold a line. Jackson Goldstone was there a few weeks ago when we did the handlebar video, and I sat on his bike and I was shocked to see how high he runs his seat. So hopefully that answers some of the question. But definitely, if you are 5'7" like myself, you probably shouldn't run a 250 mm post. Second step for me is to figure out what stack I want to run. The stack is basically the height of your bars compared to the ground, and it is something that's fairly easy to change. You can move the spacers that are right there either below or above the stem, depending what you want to achieve. Another way to do it is to swap the bars. This bike, Thai Trail, I've got 35 mm rise bar from OneUp, whereas my Stretch SL, I chose to run a 50 mm because I wanted to be even higher. I choose a different stack based on what I'm looking for on a bike and based on the terrain. The steeper the trails, the higher the stack. If I want to achieve performance when pedaling, let's say I fly to Bentonville and I'm riding easier trail and I want to focus on having a good pedaling position, I'm gonna lower my stack. Another thing that stack does is that it changes how a bike feels, and it changes a little bit the size of the bike. Someone like myself that like longer bike, by riding a higher stack, I make the cockpit feel a little bit tighter. So that's a little trick you can do if your bike feels a little bit big. And the contrary, if your bike feels a little bit small, perhaps having a lower stack will help making it feel a little bit longer. Another thing with the stack, when you run a high stack like myself, not only you sacrifice the pedaling, you also sacrifice your ability to put weight on your front wheel to get grip, which is really important. But with the type of trail I do, I'll rather sacrifice that and have a position that makes me more comfortable and more confident when it's super steep. A higher stack also removes some weight on your wrist, which in my opinion makes riding a little bit more comfortable. Third step would be to figure out my bar positioning. So I've done a video a couple weeks ago, make sure you check it out. I'll put a link in the description, but I'm gonna sum it up a little bit. First of all, bar width, just like dropper post, should be proportional to your body type. Myself, I run 738 mm. I know it's precise, but that's just because I cut it just before the 740 mm mark. And I feel that it gives me the most amount of control. I've got a bike that's really stable, really nimble, but most importantly, when I get into a super heavy compression, that's where I feel the strongest. And I also get good clearance with the trees around me. So I cut the bar and then I figure out the stem length and the bar roll. Stem length for me, I like to keep it consistent on every bike, so I run 35mm, but if I did have a bike that felt too small, then I'll probably run a 42mm to just have a little bit more space. Another thing, when you run a stem that's short, your steering is really quick, but your ability to put weight on the front, just a little bit like we saw with the stack, is affected. So the shorter the stem is, I find it's a little bit harder to put weight on your grips and get that traction when you're cornering. So that's something to take in mind, but typically shorter stems are better when it's really steep and gnarly because they allow you to get on the back of the bike a little bit easier. Other thing that we need to touch on is your bar roll. So your bar roll, myself, I run it, I know it's pretty hard to tell, but I run it essentially parallel to the fork. That's kind of the industry standard where that's your starting position, and that's how I like it. If I wanted to achieve a bike that feels a little bit longer and more importantly, more weight on the front wheel to get that traction when I corner, especially on flat ground, then I will roll it forward just like Jackson Goldstone does or Jesse Melamed. I tried, I don't love the feeling. It does corner better, you get more grip, but I find that it doesn't put me as confident when I go and ride steep gnarly trail. Steep gnarly trail, typically you want to be a little bit more on the back, which is why I like that position better. Okay, I think we're done with the bars, but if you want to see more detail, make sure you check out that link down below. This video is brought to you by Jenson USA. Jenson is an online shop that sells worldwide most mountain biking product I use. They have been a great support of this YouTube channel for the past few years, and you can find on their website one-up components, air gun, galfer, feedlock, even my tools from Topic or my tires from Maxxis, U-Sway packs, Met and Bluegrass. Pretty much every mountain biking product you need, they have it. So make sure you visit them by using the link in the description. When you use that link, that supports the channel and the videos. Now let's keep on riding. Since we are talking about body position, bike geometry, and really setting up the bike, I want to point out a product that's been a game changer for me that I've been using for years. It is a reach adjuster from Works Components. Shout out to Propane as well for making bikes with a headset that allows you to use that product. What it is basically a system on your headset that allows you to run either a bit forward or backward to make the bike feel custom. Most of the World Cup racers use that. I use it, and for me that's the difference between going on your bike and wishing it was slightly longer or slightly shorter and being able to make it fit perfect. This is for example a Shrek SL. Last year I ran it with a normal headset and the bike felt slightly short, while this year I went with plus 5mm and it feels really good. On my downhill bike, it's a size large, it felt too long, I run it minus 5mm and I was super happy with it. So if you got a bike atom that allows you to do that and you feel like you're in between sizes, this could be a great solution. Step number 4 is something I'm extremely particular about as well. It's gonna be the command on my handlebar. So of course, left grip on the left, right grip on the right, it's pretty obvious, but those Ergon GDH have an ergonomic shape that allows you to change a little bit how the position and how the feel of your handlebar. Sometimes I run them very slightly forward because it helps to bring my elbows up a little bit and gives me a better position, especially when cornering on the flat. The next thing I do is set up the brakes. This is dependent on every single brand of brakes and the grips you have, of course, and of course the size of your hand. But I like to run exactly 4mm between the lever and the grip. When I put my hand on the bar, I want the hand to be just at the edge of the grip so I can use that little support right there. And that's how I do my setup. I make sure that when I press on the lever, I get close to this finger, but I don't touch it. I want it to feel like I can press a bit further if I needed to, or if for whatever reason the blade on the brake wasn't good, it's not gonna get stuck on that knuckle and therefore affect how the bike brakes. So I first focus on finding the right angle for the brakes, then I adjust the reach. The right angle for the brake is different for everybody. If you don't have any wrist issues and your wrist don't hurt, I like to actually have my wrist a little bit bended like this, because that allows me to relax a little bit more and I don't have to grip the handlebar that much. On long downhill and when it's really rough, I feel like I don't have to be as tense, and that saves me a little bit of arm pump. And for me, the correct angle of the brake is actually 13 degrees. I'm gonna show you how I calculate it. If you got an iPhone, you got this app called Measure. And right there, I've got 13 degrees. I usually start at 13 degrees, but depending on the type of terrain I do and how steep are the trail, how long are the downhill, I might go even closer to 10 degrees. The reach is basically how far is the lever. You can adjust it pretty easily. Doesn't require any tool, but I like to have a fairly short throw, and I like to have a contact point of the brake pads pretty quick, so that way I get to push on the lever and right away the brake pads bite onto the disc. The most important for me is going to be spending time setting up the brake lever, because when riding downhill you are on the brakes all the time. The shifter and dropper is something that I do after I found the right setup for the brakes, simply because you don't shift nearly as much as you brake. So I run my Shimano shifter on the inside of the brake, same for the one-up dropper. This is pretty straightforward. So dropper post, I mostly use it when I'm standing up. So I find a position that's comfortable when I'm standing in attack position. And for the shifter, fortunately you can pull or push, and I try to find an angle of the lever that is easily accessible pretty much at all time. But when I actually ride downhill, I don't shift nearly as much as when I pedal uphill. So okay, that's about it. Let's move on to the next step. Before we talk about the next step, I always make sure that all my bolts are tight, especially around the handlebar and the control, because I'm in the garage trying to move my bar forward, backwards, play with the angle of the lever. It is extremely easy to forget. So I torque everything to spec, especially around the handlebar. Brake lever, I want them fairly loose in case I crash. They are able to rotate and the lever doesn't break, and also you don't damage the carbon. But bar and stem, extremely key, that is torque properly. Okay, step number 5, which is extremely important for me, is to make sure that my bike doesn't make a single noise. A fast bike, or I guess a quiet bike, is a fast bike, and a quiet bike is also a fun bike. So I'm quite literally gonna smack it around and make sure that if there is a noise, I figure out before I actually even ride the bike on the trail. It's pretty dead silent. My clutch is on, chain links, B-tension, everything is good. If your bike is noisy, you can definitely use a STFU bike or a rim packed. I'm actually gonna be running a rim packed and different cranks on this bike. It's gonna make the bike even more silent, but also it's going to improve how it performs going downhill. I also smack around the front wheel. And right now, for example, I can hear my cables are doing a bit of noise. So I'm gonna have to rework a little bit and make sure that they don't smash against each other. And sometimes your brake pads can rattle a little bit in your caliper. If it's the case, I've got this little trick. I put a tiny piece of rubber. This is like a road bike tube that I cut and I put at the back of the brake pad. So that way they don't get to move, and that removes any type of noise. I think the bike is really silent like that. Let's go on to our next step. Okay, step number 6, and the most exciting one of all of them, is because it's gonna be my first time actually riding the bike around on a parking lot, a driveway, or even a garage, and really bouncing on it to have a feel for the suspension and make sure that all the settings I've done actually feel right. Normally what I will do is use proper bike shoes. So I'm capable of clipping in on the pedal and actually pushing really hard on the bike and on the suspension to have a good feel for it. One thing that a lot of people do, and I personally don't, is measuring the sag. The sag is actually awkward to measure and therefore fairly unreliable in my opinion. I feel like I get more information from just bouncing really hard on the bike on a parking lot. For example, the Propane Eugene that's behind me, 130mm travel, I'm capable of bottoming it out on a parking lot. Same for most of my trail bikes. If I push really hard and try to really basically dig my feet through the ground when I push on the pedal, I'm able to reproduce forces that normally I don't really have on the trails, because once I ride the trail, I'm trying to ride smooth and therefore be light on the bike. So I feel that gives me a lot of information, and I'm capable of setting up the suspension pretty close to how they should actually feel. In terms of suspension, I'm gonna be doing a very in-depth video with Vorsprung suspension in a couple of weeks or a few months, so make sure to subscribe to the channel. For me, it's pretty easy to get the shock dialed because this shock is custom built for me, for my riding style, for my weight, for the trails I like to ride, and most importantly, for this specific bike with this leverage ratio, etc. But if you don't have this, going off the manufacturer recommendation to start setting up your suspension is gonna be key. First thing you do obviously is your spring rate, then your rebound, then your low speed, high speed compression, and hydraulic bottom out. For your compression and hydraulic bottom out, you definitely need to be riding the bike to figure out on actual trails. But yeah, that's about it for suspension. I look forward to post this video with Vorsprung. I think it's gonna be really interesting. And myself, I look forward to learn more about it. Okay, I think your bike is set up and now it's ready to get dirty. But before you go and hit the trail, make sure you check out the tire pressure. Before every single ride, you want to make sure you got the right amount of PSI. And if you're unsure, well, subscribe to the channel because I'm gonna be doing a very complete video about tires. Also check your pedal and your shoes, especially if you got some new pedals. They work together and it's one of the 3 contact points you got with the bike, so it's key. Now if you enjoyed the video, make sure you subscribe and leave me a comment with the most valuable tip or step. And if I forget something, please let me know. I want to know about it. As always, you can support the channel by using the links in the description and you can save some money with those codes. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.